Okay, we've been talking this week about working with buyers, and we're going to continue that discussion working with buyers today. Let's go a little bit over what we talked about on Tuesday, just to review. First thing you're going to do when you have a buyer is what? Interview them and find out. What are we going to find out?
Pre-approved. Well, that's afterwards, but after you talk to them. If they're
Right.
serious about wanting to buy.
Right. How long they've
looking.
been looking,
That's right.
what's their time frame, how soon do they need to move? And one thing that a lot of trainers say is when you're talking to buyers and sellers, you're asking them how soon they need to move, not how soon they need to buy or sell. How soon? Because that's more of what they're thinking about. They're thinking about a move in their future. So how soon do you need to move? What is driving this move? What's happening in your life that's causing you to move? Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit today about, I think we should talk about a number of things that we maybe didn't talk about on Monday. One of the things that you're going to come across when you're working with the buyer, especially once they've made an offer, it's been accepted, they're in escrow, and if they're getting a loan, maybe they're working on that part of it. One of the things they're going to be asked is how they're going to take title. Do you remember some of the ways that they can take title? As joint tenants,
Tenants in common.
tenants in common,
If they will, tenants.
community property,
Yeah.
community property with right of survivorship, or as a trustee for a trust and a trust. They can put that property in a trust. Hi, Noe. One of the things that it's important to know is that they have to make the decision on how they're going to hold title. You cannot tell somebody how to, or you can't recommend or even suggest how they can take title to a property. And sometimes you can get caught up in advising somebody because they'll ask you a question that seems perfectly innocent. Well, how do most people take title? How do you take title? If that's good enough for you, maybe that's how I should take it. But there's consequences to any way that they can take title. And because we don't know their entire financial picture, their entire everything about them, we can't give them advice on how they should take title. And we'll talk a little bit about that. As soon as you get your license and you're ready to go, you want to start meeting some title people or go online. They're going to have some information for you, and you can get this online too. All of the title companies will have a sheet of paper, like a brochure, that's going to show all of the different ways of taking title. If you hand that to them and say, you can read this and then talk to your financial advisor, your attorney, your CPA, whoever advises them that can legally do that, we cannot legally do that. And let them know that. It's not that I don't know the different ways, it's that I don't know your complete financial history and what would be best in your circumstance. That's why you need to talk to your own advisor. Okay. Just because we're talking about it here in class, we're going to talk about some of those ways, some of the consequences. Most people that have a relationship don't take property as tenants in common. Sometimes business partners or people that are investing together or something like that will take property as tenants in common, because then anybody that has a share in that as a tenant in common can sell their property or their interest in it at any time, so on and so forth. There's no right of survivorship to that. They can will it, they can do whatever, but the other people don't just inherit that because the same way that they would as tenants in common, that, I'm sorry, as joint tenants, something like that. For people who have a relationship, either they're married or they have some kind of a domestic union, whatever it is, two sisters, two brothers buying property together, a mother and a daughter, a father and a son, or whatever that combination might be, they can take property as tenants in common. I'm sorry, joint tenants. As joint tenants, they have the right of survivorship, which means that if whoever else is on title as a joint tenant passes away, the remaining joint tenant can become the sole owner of that property if it's a couple. The problem is this, and this is why you want to be careful. What most people don't understand is that if there is a couple, let's say they're a married couple, and they take it as joint tenants with the right of survivorship, and one of them passes away, as long as the remaining surviving joint tenant doesn't sell that property, they don't have a problem. They've got the right to enjoy that property, live there until they die, do whatever they really want to do with it. But the moment that they sell that property, there is a tax consequence for the joint tenant that passed away. And that means they may have to pay some taxes on that portion of the property. And that catches a lot of people off guard, okay? So one way around not having to pay the tax consequences would be to take property as community property with right of survivorship. If it is community property with right of survivorship and one of the spouses passes away and the other spouse sells it, there is no tax consequence. They've got the whole property then, okay? Best way to hold title is in a trust. And at the moment of death, the people in the trust, if it's, let's say it's a couple that have formed this trust and they've got their real property and personal property, so on and so forth, in this trust, then if one of them, and let's call them the creator trustees, if one of those creator trustees passes away, depending on how they have that trust set up, it's going to go, everything is going to go to that remaining trustee. As a couple, or as the two creator trustees, they have set up some successor trustees so that when they both pass away, whoever those successor trustees are inheriting the property, and there's probably naming one of those successor trustees who is going to do the work for the trust at that point, okay? A trust is the best way, and hi, Renee. But there's some expense involved with that. They have to see an attorney or somebody that sets those up. They can be fairly expensive, but you can get them done relatively inexpensively too. Every trust is a little bit unique in that there's some flexibility in the way that things are set up. So if you have a chance to tell anybody anything at all, the best way to hold title is in a trust, but you need to see an attorney, so on and so forth. I think a lot of times people make mistakes, and sometimes they have been counseled by their attorney to do this, but I'm going to tell you what happens. And I think sometimes the attorneys, I don't know what they're thinking or why, they've got a reason for what they do, but sometimes I think they aren't aware of the consequences of such a thing. And here's an example. Um, there's a single parent that's becoming quite elderly, but that single parent has children. And so that parent wants to add one of those children on title so that if anything happens to that parent, that property passes as a joint tenant to that child. Okay, if that child has never lived in the property, then there's going to be tax consequences if that child sells the property, okay? The tax consequences are going to be 3 1/3% of the sales price to the state of California under the FERPTA thing that every property is subject to. So I think a lot of times attorneys don't realize that they may have just cost that family 3 1/3% by doing that. We had one the other day, and I had not seen this before. It was new to me. There was a death deed that the mother had made out so that in the event of her death or upon her death, then this death deed said that her 2 children inherited the property upon her death. I really challenged that myself about that 3 1/3%, but that became an escrow issue. Best for me to step out of the way and not have an opinion about it as somebody who looks at our files and tries to keep that kind of stuff straight. So best thing again is to let an attorney decide. But if you're involved in a family situation where an attorney suggests that parents put a child on title with them so that they're untitled, they don't have to do a probate at that point. I still think the best way is a trust. With a trust, you don't have to do a probate. Everything passes immediately, and it's nobody's business except the people involved in the trust as to what happens at that point in time. They have the right to keep it, sell it, do whatever. Okay. Any questions about how people can hold title and so on and so forth? Okay. All right. So if somebody asks you how they should hold title, let them know there's a number of ways, but that you are not legally capable of telling them the best for them. They have to seek the advice of either an attorney or a CPA.
Not to interrupt the class, but Chicago Title's offering some virtual classes. If you guys want to supplement what you guys is learn, what we're learning, like on another date, they're offering Title and Escrow 101, how to read the preliminary title report.
Excellent.
And roadblocks and escrow. I know the roadblocks and escrow one's pretty good.
Good.
But that might be something good that you can all get on later on.
Oh, goodness.
So, okay, since we're on that topic.
Yeah, that's great. I would highly recommend them, especially learning how to read a prelim. Let's talk about that for a moment. Every time we have an escrow, we're going to get a preliminary title report that's going to show everything that's recorded against that property. Some of those things have to be cleared off so that they can pass clear title to a buyer. Some of those things may remain, and the buyer is buying that property subject to some of those things. As an example, an easement. There might be an easement on a property that's been recorded. So that prelim is something that you as an agent, whether you're representing the buyer or the seller, as soon as you get that prelim, you need to look it over and see if you see any red flags. I'm going to look it over too. And the things that I'm looking for, I look to see who's on title and to make sure that the people that are on title are the same people that are signing the purchase or the purchase agreement as the sellers. A lot of times they don't match. So then we have to find out what's going on. Was there a death? Was there this or that? There's some work that has to be done. And that's really the title company's job to do that. But I can tell you as an agent, if you're on top of it and you can head those things off sooner than later, it's going to save you a lot of grief just to be proactive in looking at those things and seeing what's there. And if there is something like that, the other thing, I used to check this with every file. I don't check it anymore because when I had paper files, I could do it very easily. But compare the APN that's in the prelim with the one that's on your documents because you want them to match. Nothing can be more problematic than having an APN for a different property that's recorded on your sale because that then is another property.
What is the APN?
Is the assessor's parcel number. Every property here in the state of California is given an assessor's parcel number, and that's the number that the tax assessor goes by in establishing taxes, but it also is an identification number for that property. It's going to go by the page in the recording book for where it's located, the subdivision, and then the lot number. So there's 3 different numbers there. It's 3 numbers dash 3 numbers dash, usually 2 numbers. And the last 2 numbers are going to be the lot number for that property. And of course, no 2 are the same. So that's why it's very specific to a property and you want to make sure that they do match. Okay.
Is there any other red flag that you recommend looking for when looking at
In the
that?
prelim, yes, look to see if there are any liens or judgments, that kind of thing. One of the reasons that's important, let's say they've got 2 tax liens on there. One maybe is for 50,000, the other one is for 35,000, 40,000. That can be a real red flag for you if those tax liens have to be paid off and that seller doesn't have enough equity in the property. So you want to compare you just want to do some quick math in your head about the selling price. The prelim is going to show you what deeds are recorded against that property. So if there is a loan on that property with a trust deed, it will show you the original amount. You can sort of calculate a little bit by knowing how old that loan is, what the interest rate is, how long they've been paying on it. You can kind of come up with an idea of how much equity they might have or how much they may still owe on that loan. And that will give you a head start too. If you can tell right away there's just no chance that there's enough equity there, then the listing agent should have been on top of that, but you can't count on a listing agent being on top of something. That's why you have to be proactive too. Take a look and do some of those quick calculations. And if you think that it's showing something that may be a problem, get a hold of the escrow officer and ask her if she's got any new information on what's happening there. Want to add something, John? You're always welcome to jump in.
Yes, it is important for you guys to read the,
It is, yes.
I can tell you that there are some agents with license. Problem isn't necessarily that you're not knowing something too bad. It can be a problem, but it's been later on. Example, had an agent who sold the property out here, just all of that out of ways. People buying it wanted to buy it because they wanted horses. And what the guy did is he simply took you don't use the APN size in the APN on the APN books. Don't use those as your says 4.96 acres. You can look at that, but that's not a guarantee, and they'll tell you that use that as a basis. And what he had done is he had simply saw this and thought that it was an over 5 acre parcel. So happened to where they were at that you had in order to have horses, remember horses, you had to have a parcel of a certain size. And about they had it. So what he had done is he had looked at the numbers, but sometimes when you have it happen to be a corner piece, so that the dimensions go this way, then it had a little angle that goes like this, a little angle goes like this, and then so he didn't add those up. He took the one big number and took that by that, but if you added up the separate numbers, it was less than what the total number was at the big dimension. And what happened was it was big enough that it ended up having the property was under 5 acres. So when the people went down to get a permit, they had horses, you can't have horses. So,
Oh, my goodness.
and that was the whole reason why they bought the property. That
Yeah.
was the main reason was, the horses. So it's those kinds of things when you look and you look at that stuff and make sure that the numbers are right. Okay? And also, there's not very often, but occasionally happen, you'll end up getting a legal description of this property, which is not the property
Yes,
that you are actually selling.
Yeah.
Okay, so
that's a
you
real,
think the title company will not make those kinds of mistakes, but sometimes they slip through. So you always just, as a matter of course, should make sure that everything jives. I think when we talked about reading legal descriptions and how and this is where that comes in. If you look at recorded maps and government surveys, and starting with the southwest corner, the west half, and going on, it can be a little complicated. After you read those a few times, you're going to get a feel for it. But it's very intimidating the first few times around to look and say, I'm not sure where I'm going with this stuff. It really is. I might even I haven't read one in quite a while. I probably think I'm ahead of it. I sit around here, but I see what you're doing. It's just that that's one of those little things, that 2% rule. You have to be careful with the 2% rule. Okay? That is 98% of the time everything goes okay. It's the 2% that something happens. So how do you address that? So just having that process.
John, sometimes on those country properties in particular, the property will go to the middle of the street. And so you have kind of a gross acreage and a net acreage, and you've got to pay attention to that too, because
That's very
it could.
important, particularly when you have some where you have sometimes rural properties that kind of need to be developed and you get the dimensions. And what they're not telling you is that dimensions are actually in the middle of a road. So they may not have been an actual deed easement, dedication, and dedication for that road right away. So a lot happens in rural properties, but you have a road that they actually own you. So you own half the road, but you can't use it. So
A question we used to ask on the coast quite a bit, and I never hear it here, is whether it's air measured or ground measured acreage, because especially where you've got rolling hills and that kind of thing, if it's air measured, you're going to have a whole different amount of acreage in something than if you're going up and down those hills doing it that way. But I don't know if they air measure anything here.
I don't know either. All I can tell you, I really don't know if they do it out there. That makes a difference.
Yes.
And, even you guys sometimes looking at maps with topography, when all the lines are real close together, that means that's a real steep thing. The farther apart the lines are, the more the flatter it is. And that's something how you read stuff. A lot of times out here, and years ago, when Don and Billy subdivided the Bear Ranches and all the stuff, all he did was go like this. Maps, irrespective of all the stuff and created these parcels. And some of them, you look at it and you go out and look at it, and it might be an acre and a half or 2 acre parcel, but probably only a half acre of this building, because the rest of it is all ravine or some other kind of thing. So it's stuff that you have to know.
Another problem that we see occasionally now is that if you have an old survey that was done many, many years ago when all they had was a chain and a stick and they did it that way, and now you've got something that's done by GPS, chances are you're going to have different measurements. And if you get one property, let's say it's an old subdivision, had this happen over toward Carissa Plains, you get an old subdivision and one person wants a new survey, there's a good chance it's going to throw every one of those properties off, and that opens a real can of worms.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to think about when you start getting into surveys and that kind of thing. if you've got a country property that says that it has easements and it's not giving you any particulars on those easements, I would, don't ask your escrow officer, but get a hold of the title officer and ask them to plot those easements for you, and they will, because you want to know how they go across that property, because if there's only, let's say, one building site on this property and there's an easement that goes across the middle of it, they can't build on it. So those are the kinds of things that you want to watch for when you're selling a property, so that you don't get caught. Because what's the one thing that causes lawsuits? There's just one thing generally: a surprise. Almost all lawsuits involve something that was a surprise to somebody. So it's just like the example John gave with the people that went down to get permit to put their horses. That was a surprise to them. You just know the next thing they did after they got a surprise was to contact an attorney. They do.
So as an agent, when we do come across the preliminary reports, are we comparing numbers every single time, fact checking those numbers? Is that what's going on, or? Okay.
Yeah, you need to read the whole thing. Now, in a prelim, the last several pages are what we call boilerplate. It's just legalese that's there, and it's going to be in every company has their own set, and they're just there. Read them once, and that's all you have to do, just so you kind of have an idea. But the information that's going to show up in a prelim that's going to vary from property to property has to do with information and exceptions. And those are the things you need to read, and the more of those that you read, the more things are going to jump out at you, and you're going to have those things just reach out and tell you, pay attention to this. But it is, I'm going to tell you, there's agents out there that never look at a prelim. They probably wouldn't know the inside of a prelim or what's in it. They just don't. That's a very poor agent. You need to be very proactive and read, because you can just bet that the agent that was involved in that sale, and probably both agents, were called to task because of that situation.
Let me just say one thing,
Uh-huh.
Marsha, with prelims. One of the things you want to look for today with a lot of these subdivisions, a lot of these subdividers, you guys remember the Belarus bonds? Okay, those are development bonds that allow a subdivider to bond the cost of the offsites, but the property owners who are subject to that subdivision pay for that in their taxes. So one of the things you want to look for is a Belarus bond, because that may tell you that there's going to be a surprise, but the taxes are probably going to be much greater than it would.
Now it's brand new. They didn't have the Belarus in the title stuff. It was just an expenditure on the taxes that go to the usual.
Yeah.
I just hadn't bought a house yet. So
Well, years ago, they didn't use to disclose it. It became a big deal. All you saw was this thing, and no one ever said what it was until you found out later. Someone get the tax bill. Typically, they use about 1.26, 1.25. That's a general rule for the estimated taxes. Belarus can be, Belarus should be up to 1.5, and if not more than that, depending on the cost of the bond for the offsites. Because it could be the city may have required a property put in, and all kinds of things that would really increase that developer cost for those offsites. So that's a substantial difference. So you're talking with someone, you're telling someone who's buying, well, you can figure about 1.25 to 1.26 for your taxes. Well, that is for you. If it's Belarus, you got to tell them it's going to be more. So that's a cost to the homeowner. Okay? And a lot of times you'll find that subdividers, you have property in subdivision A, and this house is for sale for $300,000, and a like house in subdivision B is for $275,000. Well, gosh, let's get that one. But the one over here has a Belarus bond that by the time you add the two together, the cost of one would be cheaper to buy the one that's more expensive. Yeah. So just be aware of that, so you can inform your buyers that there's potential for greater costs in the property taxes.
Mhm. There's another thing that goes along with Melrose too, and that's accelerated foreclosure, I believe.
Yes.
So if somebody is delinquent in their property taxes, they've got 5 years to cure that before it goes to a tax sale. But for Melrose properties, it's only 2 years. So that can be a real thing that somebody can have their property go to a tax sale much quicker, and they're unaware of that. So other things to watch out for, I would say, would be life estates every once in a while, and particularly in an area like this where there are a lot of family ranches and so on and so forth, and the children don't want to farm that land anymore, but the parents don't want to move away, so they carve out a little section of that property with the family home on it, give a life estate to the parent or parents that are still there, and sell the rest of the property. So that life estate is very important to know about. Or maybe they've given a life estate to somebody for the whole property, and then they decide they want to sell it and find out they really can't sell it because of that life estate that's on there. So watch for those. We see those occasionally. Do you know the difference between a trust deed and a grant deed? Okay. A seller always gives a grant deed. And if the buyer has a loan, the buyer is going to have a note and deed of trust. And so that trust deed is there because there's a loan on the property. If a buyer gets a grant deed and there's not a trust deed, that means they've paid cash for the property. Okay. Okay. Trying to think of the other things. The prelim is going to show the property taxes and whether they're current or not current. It's going to show anything recorded against that property. Maybe child support, if they've got a judgment from a court, if they've got an IRS lien or judgment, anything like that will show up. And that's where you have to kind of do some math and see if you think they've got enough equity to be.
Like a mechanic's lien.
Yes, and the mechanic's lien would show up too. Yeah. Okay, other things that are going to show up. I'll tell you, one of the most interesting prelims I saw was here in this company a number of years ago. And the seller had 12 AKAs, aliases. And so I went to the agent and said, I've never seen anything like this with 12. I said something about, was she aware and what did she know? And she said, yes, she said the seller was a drug dealer and he had all of these different names. And I said, well, isn't that scary for your buyer that's going to be buying that? Are you disclosing that to the buyer that the person was in the drug peddling business? And she said, well, the person buying it is the deputy sheriff and he's very much aware. Probably the best person, because wouldn't your greatest fear be that somebody would ring the doorbell or knock at 2 o'clock in the morning and here's an unsuspecting buyer? Talk about a surprise without knowing. So it's those kind of things. If something just doesn't ring true or seem true or whatever, check it out. That's why title is there, and your escrow officer is there to pull all of the pieces together to get everything ready to pass title to a buyer. But sometimes the escrow officer doesn't know everything there is to know, and you can go directly to customer service or to a title officer and have them help you with some of that. They're the experts, and that's what they're there for too. Okay. The other thing that we will get in escrow, usually at the same time that we get a prelim, and by the way, we've got a company policy that everything has to be in Sky Slope within 24 hours of signatures or you're receiving it. So I really rely heavily on those prelims to do a good job for the agents and for the company. If I can review that prelim first before I look at anything else, it kind of makes the pieces fall together. I know what to look for and what to watch out for. If I don't get the prelim until 2 days before the closing, sometimes we have to scurry because I see something in that prelim that should have been caught, and hopefully it was caught by somebody along the way. But if it wasn't, then we've got a problem. And sometimes we have problems we have to work out. So your purchase agreement says that the seller's duty is to provide all reports and everything that seller's supposed to provide to the buyer within 7 days after acceptance. So that includes the prelim, and it includes the natural hazard disclosure statement. We have a company policy when we write a purchase agreement. We're going to be doing that coming up in a couple of weeks. When we write a purchase agreement, we want to ask for a natural hazard disclosure statement, typically paid for by the seller in this area. We like to use, there's a couple of companies, but the preferred company is Property ID. The reason is the preferred company is they've got a $20 or $22 million E&O policy that protects us, and nobody else really has that. Property ID disclosure source is a Fidelity product. They are good too. I don't know what their E&O policy is, but either of those companies are very good companies, because what the duty of a natural hazard disclosure report company is to go APN by APN and research those properties, not for the condition of the house or anything like that. It's about the things that can affect that property, like a flood zone, or whether maybe there's radon in the area. A natural hazard disclosure report will also show if there's any endangered species that may affect that property. And we think that's going to happen mostly out in the country on country properties, but it happens right here in town too. And I'll give you a good example of that. One of our agents had an NHD that there were 6 endangered species, 3 animals and 3 plants. And this was a house that was built, I think about 1961 or 62, regular, about a 6,000 square foot city lot, back in about, did I say 61 or 62? And in an area down by Kings Canyon and some street down in there. So an established area for a long time. And she brought that to me and said, I don't know what to do about this. I've never seen anything with 6 endangered species. So I looked up a couple of them because they were called dragonflies, but they look just like houseflies. And so, you know, I don't know how you're going to protect that endangered species. Anyway, we called the city and asked, because of the plants and those animals, what that meant for that house. And the city said it meant that they could not increase the footprint of that house. So if they wanted to remodel it, they had to keep the existing. They couldn't add on. I don't think they could put in a swimming pool or something like that. They had to live with the footprint of that house the way that it was. A lot of times things like that are mitigated through other properties in a subdivision somehow. Maybe they'll set aside a little tract of land where those flies can all go and be happy flies. I don't know.
They could go up.
Or you would think they
go
could.
up.
Oh,
Airspace.
and to remodel the house?
Mhm.
You know, I can't remember. I think that came up, but I can't remember what they were told. So going up wouldn't increase the the footprint of the house. I don't know if that would hurt the fly's space at all. I don't know. Oh,
Oh,
but we have quite a few things that show up from time to time. There are fairy shrimp, red-legged frogs, I think, some kind of salamander, and there's a number of plants. If you're way out in the country, you may have kit foxes and whatever. And so if those things show up on a property on the NHD, you want to pay particular attention to those endangered species because it may prohibit a buyer from using that property for what they want to. Also on country properties, you've got Land Conservancy and you've got the Williams Act. So it's important to know if it's in either one of those. Land Conservancy really has some harsh, they sound harsh, they're there for a reason. But if a ranch has some land that's in a nature conservancy, you can't even have cows or horses walk across that property, let alone pasture it. So you have to really know if people are buying property like that, what their intent is, and have them satisfy themselves to that. The Williamson Act has to do with protecting taxes on a parcel to keep the taxes low enough that farmers can afford to pay the taxes on land that they're farming. And they renew that Williamson Act. John, is it every 10 years or 20 years?
I think it's
10 years?
been a while since I've heard that.
Yeah.
My recollection was 18 years.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason, 20 years rings a bell too, but 10
Well,
years
it might
does
be
too.
But I'm
It's one or the other.
Yeah.
Okay, so if somebody wants to buy that property and they're not going to be farmers and maybe they want to develop it or do something like that, they have to get it out of the Williamson Act. And they can buy that privilege, but it involves paying some taxes that are, you have to bring the taxes up for the years that it was in the Williamson Act and or the remaining years or whatever. They'll work it out for you. And some people choose to do that. Some people like to buy those properties because they want to utilize the land as farmers. So those are the kind of things that you will see in a prelim. Okay. And an NHD. An NHD is the Natural Hazard Disclosure Report. I'm kind of wandering back and forth between the two. Sorry for being confusing. That NHD is going to go APN by APN, like I said, and talk about things that will affect the property. The really good ones do the research and let you know what's happening with that property. But there are a number of bad, what I term bad reports. There's 2 or 3 local companies that publish their own. And what they're doing in those, a lot of times, is giving you information not about specifically that property, but they'll say you need to research to see if the property is this, that, or something else, rather than saying the property is or is not affected by this. They're telling you to do the research. They're telling you what you should research. I guess there's some benefit in that. But as a buyer, particularly somebody that doesn't buy many properties, doesn't know much about that process, maybe moving from out of the area or out of state, even worse, they can really be caught off guard. So you want to have a good report for them so they can rely on that information. Flood zones, I think, probably are the thing in this area that may affect more people than not, of the things that I can think of on an NHD. If it's in a FEMA deemed flood zone, they're going to have to pay flood insurance on their properties, and that can be sometimes cost prohibitive, at the very least expensive, when you add that on to a homeowner's insurance policy. Okay,
Does it say, I forget, does it say anywhere actually it's in a high fire zone?
yes, it does. It'll say if it's in one of those wildland fire areas, or it should. Now, I don't know if the ones that London and Guarantee do or not, because a lot of times they just reference, here's a website, search for yourself. But that's why trying to save $20 or $30 on an NHD that could have a huge consequence for somebody just isn't worth it. The very most that those really good NHDs cost is between $79 and $99, so pay the difference. And if you don't write in your purchase agreement the company that you want, then the seller, and if not the seller, the escrow company can choose whatever company they want to. And if it's a Guarantee or a London company or some of those other companies, they're going to choose an inferior company because it's cheaper and because their brokers tell them to, because they're connected with that company. It's one of their profit centers. Okay. Okay. There are a number of things that show up. Radon, let's talk about radon just for a moment, because I think most people in this area aren't real familiar with it because it's not really a problem, but it does show up in our NHDs, and sometimes it will give a reading number for what the radon is. Does anybody know what radon is? Radon is a naturally occurring gas that comes off of uranium, and it's a gas that rises. And so uranium is found underground all over the world, really. Some areas heavier than other areas, but you can find uranium in the ground almost anywhere. And the gas that it emits then is the radon. And as long as there is air circulation and that number is a medium to a low range, that number, you don't have to mitigate the problem. But if you're in an area, particularly in an area where homes have basements, I don't think a lot of houses in this area have basements, but if it does, it's more likely to have radon than a house that doesn't have a basement. Okay, they do a test, and the test usually is a canister that has to sit for 24 hours or so. It needs to be in an area where there's not going to be an exchange of air with doors opening and closing and that kind of thing. After 24 hours, they pick it up. It used to be you had to send it to a lab. I don't know if any of those give you the results immediately. I don't know. You may still have to send it to a lab, and they'll send back the results of that canister. But as long as it's in a mid to a lower range, you don't have to do anything. If it is a high range, then you have to exchange the air. And a lot of times it's just a matter of keeping a door open, letting the air flow in and flow out. If it's a basement with a window, having that window open. I lived once in an area that had a lot of radon, and that radon was high enough that it had to be mitigated. But even with that, I only saw one house where they had to mitigate it ongoingly, and they just put an air exchanger along with their heating source, and it took care of the problem. But it had to be going all the time because radon can cause cancer. There's another source for radon that most people don't think of, and that is granite countertops. Depending on the part of the world that they come from, there have been people that have gotten sick from granite countertops, and with some testing, they find out that it has to do with radon in the granite. I don't think that happens very often, but it's interesting to hear that.
On this radon, you said shows on that NHD report, is that what?
Yes, a good one will show that. I don't know that some of those inferior reports may say you need to check to see, and it'll give you a warning to check, but it doesn't check for you. And it's not that these NHD companies go out and actually do a test on the property, but they're going to have data for the whole area, and they can pretty well pinpoint what's happening in a certain area.
How much can these reports be cost-wise?
The very most is about $99. Yeah, for the good one. The two good companies are Property ID and Disclosure Source. There's another company called Snap. That company is in a big lawsuit with First American right now because they're a young company with young guys that were anxious to get started, I guess. And so Mitch, what did they do? They ended up kind of,
Other title companies' information.
yes,
License source and page.
it's a nice way of saying it, huh?
Well, it's all the whole information from that company.
Yeah. So if you see something from Snap, we prefer not to do business with that company. We don't like to order from it because, first of all, they are in a lawsuit that I don't think has been settled yet. And you know, if you have to steal your information from somebody else, that's just not a good thing. So stick with the tried and true.
Yeah, I think the radon test is about $30. And then they have like a radon plug-in. I guess if you're sensitive to that kind of thing, it's like about 140.
Oh, that you leave in your house all the
Yeah,
time?
Chris told me about that. Some guy moved here from back east, and he said that it was something that concerned him. And just found this test thing that you just plug it in the wall, and I guess
Oh,
it's supposed to take readings every day or something.
oh, interesting. That NHD report is going to give you information about lead-based paint, but it's not going to do any testing. None of them will do any testing inside of a house for lead-based paint. But they will look at the FEMA map for flood zones and so on and so forth, and that's important. Those pages, I mean, those reports usually are about 60 to 70 pages for a good report, depending. I think now some of those are showing underground mines, a lot of areas, and I think this area too has some underground mines, underground tunnels from when they used to mine certain things around the hills, so on and so forth. That can be a good thing to know. It's going to talk about the dams that we have in the area and which way they may flood if a dam breaks, that kind of thing. And actually this whole area is pretty much in one of those inundation areas, yeah. Okay, so you want to get the NHD and you want to get the prelim, if you've got the buyer, as quickly as possible from the escrow company. As a buyer's agent, you can be very proactive in calling the escrow officer. And by the way, I would say when that escrow is open, in this area, it's usually the listing agent that opens escrow and chooses the title company. But I would talk to that agent and find out who they're going to use and if they've opened escrow, and then get a hold of that escrow officer. I thoroughly believe in going and sitting in front of them and getting to know them and developing a relationship. Let them know that you care about your buyers and about this transaction, because a lot of people don't. They never hear from them. They're not participating. But I think you have a duty to be proactive. And if you, after a few days, if you haven't gotten the prelim and the NHD, call them and say, we're getting close to our 7 days when we're supposed to have this in our hand, and ask them where it is.
Title companies are negotiable. That's not by default, the agent you choose that, but you could have a buyer or seller says, no, I've had experience with that, and that's what I want to do. So it's something that's is negotiable.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes a buyer may have something in escrow that they're selling to buy a new one, and they would like to have that escrow go through that company. So you, like John says, you can always request. And most agents, if they know, most sellers agents, if they know that there's a reason, they're going to be pretty good. But you get some people around here that are really stubborn and want it to be their way. So work it out between agents. Okay. The other thing that you want to be sure that you get within that 7 days are all of your disclosures. Here's what a good agent is going to do. You've got the buyer and you send your offer over to the seller's agent, the listing agent, to present and get accepted for you. A good agent on the listing side, when they send back the accepted offer, is going to send all of the disclosures at that time back to you. That's what you should hope for. But I'm going to say there's a small percentage of time that that actually happens. So sometimes you have to really ride herd on these agents and make them do what they need to do. Yes.
Oh, can you repeat that one more time? So, when will they send it again? A good agent.
We'll send back the disclosures with the accepted offer. A seller has all of these disclosures that they have to give in disclosure forms and so on and so forth. There's a whole stack of them. And a good agent will send those back with the accepted offer to keep the ball rolling, to keep everybody engaged, to do what they're supposed to do. They've got 7 days to do it. But here's the mistake that a lot of those agents make. They'll wait till they get an accepted offer before they'll ever take a disclosure to a seller to fill out. That's way too late. That should be done when they list the property, so that when they get a buyer, and in today's market, most sellers should plan that they're going to have a buyer pretty soon because our markets move pretty quickly. That listing agent should send those documents back with that accepted offer so that a buyer can get them to, a buyer's agent can get them to their buyer, go over them with them. They can make an informed decision about what they need to do. There may be something on, let's say, the transfer disclosure statement that's a red flag to the buyer, and the best way for him to find out about that is in his home inspection. Well, if your job as the buyer's agent is to get that home inspection scheduled as quickly as possible after your offer is accepted. If you've got an idea that there's a red flag there, that's something for your buyer to talk to that home inspector about and have them check it out for sure. So it's important to have all of this information flowing and everybody working together. But as so often happens, you're going to have to fight to get those disclosures a lot of times. So that's okay. Just fight for it. Call them up and say, you know, day 7 is 2 days from now. I know you've got 7 days, but is there any chance we could get those today, or what's your timeline? Where are they? And ask them. Okay. Okay, let's talk a little bit about a buyer getting a loan. Cathey from our finance department is going to come in today. She's going to be here probably about 3:15. She wasn't going to be in the office, but she's going to try her best to come and be with us for a little bit. So let's talk about what a buyer's going to do to get a loan. And did everybody get one of these books the other day?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. That's what we're going to talk about is what's in here. First of all, before you even make an offer, that buyer should have been to see their lender, and hopefully we'll have a pre-approval letter in hand whenever the offer is sent over to the seller. That pre-approval letter it isn't mandatory by law. It's more tradition in this area that that letter go accompany the purchase agreement, because that gives the seller confidence. If a seller sees they've already done this preliminary work, the lender's already showing that it's looking good for them, that gives the seller a lot more confidence rather than, well, I'm going to accept the offer. Now they're going to go see if they are pre-qualified even. They don't know. That doesn't give a seller a lot of confidence. So that letter is important for that reason. And anymore, we're going to have maybe 2 or 3 or 4 offers come in at one time that a seller's going to be reviewing. And if he's got, let's say, 3 offers that are basically the same thing, full price, not asking for much, but one of them doesn't have a pre-approval letter, one does, and the other one maybe has something else that gives the seller reason to pause, he's going to take the one with the pre-approval letter and looks good.
Is that pre-approval letter saying, hey, this person is approved for 200,000? Is that real what you're saying?
Yeah. Yes, the lender's going to say the upper limit of the loan that they're qualified for. And usually it will say if there's any conditions, they'll name those conditions at that point that they may have. But then they're going to get an appraisal and the purchase agreement. And they've already verified their employment. They've verified their down payment. They verified their credit history, and they like to look at bank statements to know what they've got in the bank, so on and so forth, because usually they want about a 6-month cushion there. So they've got to have a little bit of money in savings for that cushion. And that's part of that pre-approval process. They're doing all of that research to make sure that that is a sound buyer. Okay, and that way they can give them an approval letter based upon getting an accepted offer and an appraisal.
If you don't have a 6-month cushion, is it hard? Is that a factor?
Let's talk to us about that. How much?
It all depends on the ratio. Like, if they're making incredible income and how they're little bit, it's not as big of a deal as if they actually understand and they're just straight in line. That's it all is a ratio. The lenders will explain to you.
Yeah, they're going to factor it all together. Once the loan officer gets all of that together and has the appraisal and all of that, they're going to send all of that package to underwriting that goes over it very carefully. They really scrutinize it very carefully.
The best ones are like ones where the verification of the down payment is verified, all the funds are verified, all the credit has been checked, by everybody, by the underwriter. And the only thing that it's predicated on is like the appraisal. That's the best, but it doesn't always happen like that because the underwriter kind of has to see everything. But a couple guys I worked with, big work. There's only one guy like that. He's the underwriter and the lender. So what he said was good, it was good.
Oh, that's good.
But he no longer has that problem.
Oh,
No.
okay. So depending on where your buyer is in that process, when you meet your buyer, they may want to talk to you about a home loan, kinds of home loans. You're not going to be the one, or I would recommend that you're not the one. We used to do this years ago, but I would get them to a lender and let that lender do their job. But you need to have some basic information to help your buyer and to make sure that they're on course. Kinds of loans. Basically, the kind of loans that we can get through a lender are going to be conventional, FHA, VA, and then there are USDA loans, there are jumbo loans. A jumbo loan is for properties over 455. It might be. Is it?
Yeah, they've gone up quite a bit.
Have they, for a jumbo loan? Okay, all right. We'll ask Cathey when she gets here what jumbos are now. But those are for our upper end homes. And your USDA loans are for rural areas that have a smaller population. And I believe that they will do 100% loan. Do you know? Okay, I think that they will do, and we'll ask Cathey that too. FHA and VA loans are government-backed loans, okay? On a VA loan, the VA actually holds title interest in the property, and the veteran has equity interest until they get it paid for. And for a conventional loan, that usually is sometimes it's a portfolio loan for the company that's making the loan. They may sell it then on a secondary market to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. Okay. So it's good to know, and what determines what somebody may be getting in the way of a loan, a lot of times is their credit score. FHA loans are geared or have been geared to accept lower credit scores so that more people can get into home ownership. That's the goal there. And VA is a benefit to people that have served in the armed forces of the United States. So they're the ones that are entitled to VA loans. Okay. So what goes into somebody's credit history? A little bit of everything. And I read something the other day that I made a copy, but now I can't remember. Read something about lenders may even get on to Facebook and see what you put on Facebook and judge your credit worthiness by that. Have you heard that, Mitz?
No, not that one.
Yeah, I should have made a copy, but I read that the other day. Interesting. So the other things that are going into your credit worthiness are, and this has to do with your credit score. Credit scores are very important because that's going to determine the kind of loan you can get and the interest rate that you may get because of your credit score, good or bad, up or down, okay? How often you pay your bills on time. They're going to compare the amount of credit history that you have or the credit that you have available to you and how much of that credit you're using. And so I think that it's important when you're working with a buyer to tell them once they've been to their lender and they've started that process, and especially when they have an accepted offer, they don't want to do anything, nothing to change their credit score or to affect their credit history. And that includes paying off bills. Because if you pay off something that you've already been factored in for your current credit score and you pay it off, that means you could go into debt again because you've got that new credit available to you. And lenders feel very uneasy about that. So they don't like you to pay things off. If you're going to pay something off, or they may require that you pay something off. Sometimes they do that. But in those things, if your buyer's going to do anything, they need to check with their loan officer before they pay anything off, before they acquire anything new in the way of debt. They don't want to get a new credit card.
times I think that they were bounding upon that a while back.
Ah. And they certainly don't want to make any major purchases. For some reason, people that are buying a new house like to buy new cars. There's something about that new car in the driveway when you have a new house. You did that? Oh, no? A lot of people do.
Can't
It's,
do that. If you do that, you don't get a loan.
yeah, that's right. You won't because you just destroyed your credit history for that snapshot in time. So they shouldn't be charging anything. If it's bigger than a tube of toothpaste, they probably shouldn't be charging it. Don't change anything. And it's very important to remind people because they forget. And we had a case, it's been a while back, but this probably happens more often than people guess. They co-signed a loan for a car for a family member and then lost the escrow on their house because then they no longer qualified. And they had no idea how that would affect their credit rating, but it did. So, yeah. So their credit history is extremely important. Revolving charge cards, installment. There's a lot of different kinds of credit. So, used to we had Gottschalks. And if you had a Gottschalks card, I guess now it would be Macy's. If you have a Macy's card, that's a revolving charge account. And it's usually any debt that is going to take longer than 6 months to pay for, they're going to look at very carefully. Okay. So the other thing that can factor into somebody getting a home loan is something like solar panels on a roof that the payment for that is going to be absorbed by the buyer. That can throw them out of qualifying. If they've qualified for the loan and then they buy a house that has a solar payment on it, it can change their whole qualification. So you have to be very careful with those kinds of things. Okay. Okay, so what the buyer needs to take with them to see a lender, let's say your buyer hasn't been to see one yet, they need to take their social security cards with them, their driver's license or their federal identification, depending on which they have, a bank statement, checking, savings, and investment, retirement accounts, whatever. And they probably are going to want to see 2 or 3 months of those, I'm guessing, not just one. Paycheck stubs, they want a verified payment, and 2 years tax returns. So I would say take 3 or 4 months of banking statements, saving statements, that kind of thing, 2 years of tax returns with them when they see their loan officer, and that will save them a trip and expedite the process. Okay. The upfront cost for a buyer when they're getting a loan is going to be their credit report, which is usually in the neighborhood of $25 or so, and an appraisal once they get an accepted offer. And the appraisals are going to run, I'm going to say, in the neighborhood of $500, $50 either side of 500 probably. Is that about right? Yeah. Okay. Okay. A lot of times parents want to help children by giving them the down payment, that kind of thing. And the lender probably is going to require a gift letter. If the money isn't in an account that's seasoned money, meaning that money has been there for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 months, they will call that seasoned money. If the money isn't seasoned, then they want to know where it came from. And if money is gift money from relatives, parents, grandparents, something like that, then I think they want a gift letter along with it indicating that it is a gift and it's not to be paid back. Has to come from
Okay.
a bank.
A lot of Korean people have cash in their mattress, literally.
Oh,
So they have to deposit in the bank?
Yeah, they have to ask them from a bank.
yes.
It can't be, I think you said 20% or.
What?
The gift letter, it can't be more than so much of the loan, can't be this, right?
Oh,
Isn't it?
Well, I think part of, I'm not sure. Did I say that?
No,
I don't know
thought
if
it was
that or
in the-
not.
That's certain ones that you have
Yeah, it has to.
certain amount has to.
And you may run into that sometimes, where you have people who like to keep cash. Some of our cultures are that way, Hispanics, very many times. My mother-in-law kept about $20,000 in her house,
Uh-huh.
cash. Used to drive us crazy.
Asian people do that too.
Well, what you need to tell them though is that if they're gonna have to use some of that money, you need to plan in advance, and don't be sticking $10,000 into your account 30 days or 45 days before escrow started to close, because somebody's gonna wanna know where that money came from, okay? So it's a little deceivious, but maybe about 3,500 and 5,000, and spread it out over a period of time. So if they anticipate knowing that they're gonna look to buy a house and they're gonna use some of this cash money they got sitting somewhere, we might tell them that, well, you might want to start now kind of putting some of that money into your bank account, so it doesn't all come all at one time. Specifically, when lenders will look, they look back and look at that.
My friend's dad had a lot of cash put away. So it took us 6 months to get qualified because he could only put in
So much at a time, yes, because it'll be a red flag. All of a sudden, you stick $25,000, because the lender's gonna ask for bank statements and records, and then say, well, where did this money come from? Is this a loan? Did somebody make you a loan? Because you're using this money to buy this house, okay? So, in those instances where you have, people are gonna pull cash out of from under the bed or wherever else, give a little advance on the plan of the boy.
I had a time family who sold their house. They said, we have $10,000 in a roll somewhere in the house. We can't find it. We looked everywhere. We couldn't find it anywhere. So
was in a coffee can.
it was literally with a rubber band. They said, it's 10. I said, $10,000 with a rubber band?
Yeah, well.
It's in the tissue box.
With a couple of pieces on it.
Yeah, it's interesting the way people do save money. So yes, it has to be seasoned. They have to account for it. And by the way, if there is money coming from out of the country, it's going to have to be scrutinized by home security. And that's going to take some time too. So any money coming into the country, plan on some extra time there. Okay.
Is that part of the Department of Justice or is that?
Homeland Security?
There's some, some of that, I think it's been around for a while because of the money laundering and all the other, they think it's some illegal drug stuff going on. Something illegally. The government thinks there's no reason you should have all that cash on hand. It should all be in the system where we can account for it.
Yes. Okay. Let's talk about credit scores just briefly. Your FICO score is going to affect everything. An excellent score is going to be in the 800s, 800 to 850. A very good score is 750 down to 700, or is up to 799. A good score is going to be, I can't read my yellow paper here. Is going to be 760. Oh, 700 to 749. Fair is 650 to 699. Poor 600 to 640, and then very bad is anything below below that. If people need to raise their credit scores, they can work on that. And I think that's one thing that Cathey's very good at doing. If somebody has a low score or it's not high enough, there are things that they can do to raise that score actually pretty quickly. And they can raise it up several points in 2 or 3 months if they practice some good judgment and follow the outline that a lender will give them to raise that credit score. There are people that help people if they have really low credit scores and they're trying to raise them. There are companies that will help them with that, but they do charge.
Credit score and only 1.2% of anyone in the United States without that credit score.
What number was that, Miss?
How often have you came across that? And that's how often you came across that. Not too often.
More 800.
I think that's doable.
Yeah, it is.
I'm not gonna do that.
Well, I play with it. I love the 800. When I go buy something, go down 20 points. You work way back up. That's because you're not buying yourself, you're doing all the buying yourself. You're doing it, it's all on you, see?
I buy too much.
That's his credit is really good because he's not doing nothing, you're doing it all.
Okay, where are we time-wise?
The best thing I ever did was get into real estate, because I had lots of credit cards when I went to college. So we had 13 credit cards at the time.
Yeah. That was back in the day.
Is it,
you know, I had
I
a-
was gonna ask, is it like affect the credit score if you have a lot of credit cards, you don't use them? You have,
It depends on how big your balance is, how often.
You know, back in the 80s and I used to get unsolicited, or I never had a card, it was always fixed rate, and I had an investment rate card, never more than 6.9%. You know, I had enough cards to pull $250,000 in cash out of the card. I
Yes.
looked at one time, back and says, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I just go and pull that money out and then file bankruptcy?
Because you're a good guy, John.
I guess, but I thought, and I finally got to, you know what, this is scary, so I got rid of all but 3.
Yeah.
some people,
But you used to get them, they don't do that anymore, I don't think they do.
No.
But they just send you unsolicited ones, you know?
Yeah.
I mean,
Once you sign up to school, they just send you everything under the sun.
yes.
Okay, so one of the first things when you have a buyer and you're in escrow that you want to do is get your buyer with their insurance company right away. That's very important because as things happen around the country and around California, sometimes it becomes more difficult for insurance companies to underwrite insurance policies. So you want to make sure that, especially if there's a loan, they're going to require it. And anybody's going to want insurance on their property anyway. So get them with their insurance company right away, just to ensure that you can get that done. The other things that happen during the escrow process, of course, the escrow officer's job is to collect all of this stuff, get it ready, get everything lined up so that title can pass from the seller to the buyer. Just before, let's talk about the closing and what's going to happen at the closing, because during this process, they've seen their insurance person, they're working with their lender, everything's going along quite well. They've signed all of their disclosures, they've looked at their prelim and their NHD, just waiting for the closing. As they get close to the closing, and they're going to sign loan docs, there's going to be another scrutiny of their credit. So when it's in underwriting, just before they're ready to send out their docs, they're going to do another credit check to see if that credit score has changed at all. And if it has, then it could be prohibitive in that buyer getting a loan. So that's something to tell your buyers. They're going to do 2 credit checks and one's going to be at the very end. And they've got it pretty well matched. Okay. The other thing is that they're going to do a check to see if anything has been recorded just before the closing on the buyer or the seller or the property. So if there are any new, excuse me, liens or things that have been recorded, that could prevent a recording from happening. And more often than not, if there is something, it's going to be child support things that come up right at the end. An ex-spouse finds out that that previous spouse is buying or selling a property, and they see their attorney, they get an emergency whatever from a judge, and they file something with the court, and that shows up then, and they can't close escrow until that child support is paid. That's bad for the seller, but it's bad for the buyer too. So it's bad for everybody because nothing can happen. And talk about a surprise that makes everybody unhappy, whatever it is. There may be any kind of a tax lien or a judgment or anything that shows up that has been recorded since the prelim was done at the beginning. Can hinder that closing. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Any questions so far about working with buyers? Your job during this whole process is to stay in touch with them. Your job really is to hold their hand at this point.
One
Yes.
question at the moment is when is a good time to recommend to set up the home inspection?
Okay. As soon as you get an accepted offer, you want to set up all of your inspections that your buyer wants to have. So home inspection is very important. I would call as soon as you get the accepted offer and get on their schedule, because you don't know if their lead time is going to be a day or two. If it's going to be more than a week or so, that's going to be pushing your time. You've got 17 days generally, unless it's negotiated differently than the contract, to get all of the buyer's inspections and things done. So, but the earlier that you get them done, the more time you have in case there's something that comes up that needs to be taken care of, like a repair or a renegotiation. Maybe something shows up on the home inspection or the pest inspection, and the buyer says, I still want the property, but I just can't see paying that much money for a problem that costs that much to fix. And the seller says, I'm not going to fix anything. That buyer may say, well, I'll buy it, but I'm not going to pay you what I said I would pay you. So you want to know those things as early as possible so you don't have those last minute surprises. Yeah.
Especially in this market now that places such a house, just get them all scheduled at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to,
Termite, general inspection, and if it's looking bad, maybe a roof. But the roof guy's not as bad. 'Cause
We have home inspection and
Yeah, the home inspection generally is paid for by the buyer. It's negotiable for the roof inspection and the pest inspection. On the purchase agreement, you can request either party pay for that inspection, but you're not negotiating repairs usually on the purchase agreement. You wait and get the report, and then you can negotiate the repairs that the buyer may want or the lender may want.
right, or put an addendum, is it addendum or an amendment or something like that?
It's a repair request.
A repair request,
Yeah.
or it could be an amendment.
Because it voids the contract, is what John was saying, that's sort of kind of.
So
Because if they come back with, you know, we want
I give them the green light.
50,000 less,
Yes,
for the
Yeah,
I thought that-
yes,
And
And if
everything's
all
been
of-
signed on the other one, then
yeah. If all of that's been done during the due diligence time period that the buyer has, and the buyer asks the seller to reduce the price or pay for something, and that seller refuses, and the buyer says, well, I just can't buy it, and I can't afford to pay it, or I won't pay it either way, then that buyer can back out and get their earnest money back. The only thing they're out is the cost of whatever inspection they may have had. It's pretty typical for a seller to pay for the pest inspection and the roof inspection. A lot of times the buyer will ask for a roof inspection and a 2-year roof cert.
Can you do like home inspection 9 AM, the other inspection at 1 PM?
It just depends on the company. A lot of companies, like the one I used to use, it's like 2-week backlog, that's too long. The company I use now works with Fidelity home warranty. He's pretty much available 2 or 3 days in advance. So that's the guy. The best availability, the best ability is available.
Yes, we should talk about something, and it may be that you and I have differing opinions on this, because, and John can jump in too, but a lot of times people don't want to put things on a purchase agreement because it's going to go to the lender as a strategy. And
what do you mean? What don't they want to put on there?
Provide reports.
Yeah.
That's the most common, is you don't make a condition of the deal. There's gonna be inspections, and part of the right of the buyers to have inspections done, so they'll have inspections. If they result in something, but it's not part of the contract.
Yeah, it actually came about because of foreclosure. Because the banks decided which offers they would take. So if there were no termite report, then they were more likely to accept that offer. But then your termite report becomes part of the inspection period, and you roll the termite inspection into the general inspection, and then a request for those repairs after the fact. So in your 17-week period of time. But I know what Marsha's talking about. Marsha's talking about coming clean and writing the offer the way there's no unexpected.
well, yeah, there becomes a point where you could be defrauding a lender. And I think that that is a very precarious position to be in. But some of the lenders will tell you to do it that way so underwriting doesn't see it.
Yeah, that's really what happened. We used to look to see that. And it came to a point that the lender, we talked to the lender, and the lender's in charge. I said, well, then we don't have an issue. If the lender doesn't, because the lender's the one that's going to do the damage. And the lender says, I'm okay with it. And I say, well, okay. Then, no, not have it on. The department always took a position in the contract that it really is that position that don't have a issue related to the termite report, and it's done. There's issues that are as a result of that inspection, and then there are people trying to negotiate how to do that. That the argument is that the lender's unaware of what's going on, and therefore, and the lender's the one that's skin in the game, and they want to know what's happening. And that was our position with the Department of Real Estate, is that, well, the lender's being defrauded. We talked to enough lenders, as the lender saying, and you're right, someone would say, well, that's okay with us. We don't want to know about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so, all right, so if you don't want to know about it, then it's no harm, no foul. It's just part of that negotiating process that you have, which goes on. But you can't defraud somebody that don't care about being defrauded. But they're okay with it, so.
But to me, the person that gets hurt there is the consumer, who is the person that doesn't get to do a lot of the negotiating there. So you have a consumer that has sold a house that maybe has a lot of pest work that needs to be done, but the lender didn't want to know about it, and everybody's trying to save costs for the seller, which if you're the seller's agent, that's what your job is. But then you've got a buyer that's buying a defective property that's going to be paying on it for 30 years.
Well, hopefully they come fully aware of what's trying to do. If we need to negotiate that and accept it under the terms, then I don't know if I'd have a problem with that unless the buyer's risk was gonna say, my agent told me to do this, I didn't know anything, I didn't know that I was buying a termite infested house. And only half the repairs are done, that kind of stuff. So,
It usually only comes down to those loans that are of smaller down, like a FHA loan or a 3% conventional loan. Most people that have 20% down also pay for their own termite. So, I mean, they would probably ask for it, but the guys that can't, they'll probably put on the side and then say, well, we'll negotiate that after, like the repairs, like the question repairs. That's what you would ask for. It's not hiding it, but it's getting it accepted.
yeah. And the other part is that if a buyer accepts that and they say they'll do it after the fact, most of them don't do it after the fact. Unless it's really major. So,
Yeah,
they'll do it later and later never comes.
yeah.
So they don't take care of the termites.
Well, it depends on what the issue is. Some nights, some always termite could be sidewalk repair and somebody would think that's. And some guys will do that. Say, well, I'll fix that. I can fix that. I need to replace half a dozen sections of fascia boards. I'll take care of that. Okay, and we'll negotiate that out. And they look at it, and never do it. But that's on them because they entered into it with the understanding they were going to take care of it. If they choose not to, that's their choice.
Yeah.
Your mind is working.
It is. I guess that I always think about the consumer that gets caught in the middle.
Well, I always make sure it's done one way or another. But I mean, like, that's strategy, you gotta
Yeah.
understand who you're with.
Yes. There's one other thing that we should talk about because somebody brought one to me yesterday. There are brokers that buy flippers and then they do an addendum that says, you're the buyer, you're buying this. As soon as escrow closes, don't ever contact us about anything because we're not taking care of anything. And so we've talked about that before, and I believe, tell me if I'm wrong in interpreting what you told me, John. If a buyer signs one of those addenda that has all of that garbage on it, that doesn't mean that if that seller has hidden something and the buyer finds it and can prove that there was a situation there before, it doesn't matter what the buyer signs if that seller is defrauding them.
Now, the argument would be is that if the seller knew or should have reasonable knowledge of knowing something that was wrong, they don't disclose it. And I think why these guys, some of these do that is they don't want people to come back to the ball for this stuff. And you find what? Many times these flippers say, well, I don't have to fill out a TDS and all this stuff because I don't know nothing. Yes, you do. You just mark what you know about the property.
Yes.
So that's ridiculous because if they scrutinize the property when they buy
Right.
it, they should have lots of knowledge.
Exactly. I will accept that argument and agree with you with that. But the defense they use sometimes, if you don't think, I say, how can you not know that? You don't know when you bought the property. You remodeled it, you fixed it up. What time you don't know that when you pulled up that carpet, there was a bunch of holes in the floor and you put the carpet back down and you did it and kept on going, okay? Come on. That's,
Everybody since Ken lighting into the ceiling, when they do their remodels and everything, they've been up in the ground.
Sure.
If it's a house
Yeah.
fire or something.
They know the house better than the past seller because they want to know to the penny what they're going to spend on it and what it's going to take and what they can get by without doing.
Well, I felt so bad for Russ. I really wanted him to do it. He was in a rock and a hard place with that gentleman that just went to retirement now.
Yeah.
And they took advantage of Russ's need to sell at that
Oh.
moment.
I'm leaving, I just want you guys to know I'm not. Okay?
Thank you, Kathy.
okay.
Okay.
I'll figure it out.
Okay, so I was going to say, your job going through the escrow process is to be the chief handholder of your buyers. You want to be with them as much as possible. If they're doing a home inspection, you have to be there if they're going to be there. You can't send a buyer to a property without you being with them, okay? You have to be with that buyer every time that they want to go to that property. So home inspection, if they have any other reason for being there, you have to set up an appointment and be with them. When they're with their lender and they're going to sign their final documents, you need to be there. So schedule your time and tell your escrow officer, I won't let my buyer sign these unless I'm present. Let that escrow officer know how you work, because if they don't know how you work, they're going to set up that signing and they can't tell your buyer anything, or they're not supposed to. And so then your buyer's sitting there really like a little lost child without somebody there. They need you. And in my opinion, that's part of your job, is to be with them when they're signing documents for the closing, whatever they need to do. Be a part of that process, and then be a part of the process afterwards. You want to be the one to hand the keys to them. You don't want them to go pick them up at somebody's office someplace. That's one of the greatest moments in somebody's life, to get those keys, and they should come from you, because they're going to remember who they got them from.
You know, it's a good trick too. If you go to the title company with the client, is if you can pick up their birthdays that day too. So under their phone numbers, I type in their birthday.
Oh, that's good, Mitch. Yeah,
Sneaky.
yeah.
They're going, how did you know my birthday? I was in the title company.
Yeah.
Oh, so you know their birthday.
Yeah, I've been doing it for 28 years, so that's a lot of birthdays.
So then, at the closing, you want to make sure that they've got all of their papers. Also remember that as you go, you need to give them their papers. Every time they sign something, they get a copy of it then. We have some agents that have kept the papers to the end to give all of those signed copies to them in a folder at the end. It's okay if you want to do something like that, but they need to be getting those copies as they go, and not later, because that's California state law. And you can lose your license that way. That's one of the ways. So make sure they've got all of their papers. And a tip for you at the closing, when you get a copy of the closing, keep a copy of their closing statement. Keep a special file just for closing statements. And then when the old year passes and you're in a new year, everybody's getting ready for tax season, then that's a really good way to keep in touch with your buyers. Send them a copy and say, I know you got this when you closed on your house last year, but you're going to need it for your tax man. Now you won't have to hunt for it. Here's a copy just for you. It's a great way. They're very appreciative. Then one more way to keep in front of them as their agent. And don't be an agent at the closing that never contacts your buyers or sellers after the closing. Keep in touch with them. A lot of times agents are afraid they're going to have something to say. Well, we bought this house and now this is wrong or that's wrong. Be there for them. If they've got a problem, help them work through it. Hopefully they have a home warranty on that property. We haven't talked about those yet, but that's something that everybody should have at the closing, is a home warranty. It's, we think it's very important. If our buyers don't have a home warranty, we want a waiver signed stating that they had the opportunity and passed it up. It was their decision. But that home warranty warrants the electrical, plumbing, and heating, and in certain cases, appliances, and there's other add-ons like pool equipment, septic, roof. You can add different components. It will protect it for a year from the close of escrow, so that if anything happens after they move in, there's that protection. for them. There is a per craft fee. Let's say it's an electrical problem and you have to have an electrician come out. They're probably going to charge, depending on the company, $75 or $100 to have that craft person come out. The homeowner pays it, but then there shouldn't be anything else that they would have to pay for. Hopefully.
When does that conversation come up to have to suggest homeowners?
Actually, when you're writing up the offer, there's a place in the purchase agreement that there's a whole paragraph there that stipulates whether the buyer or seller are going to pay for it, who's going to pay for it. And in this area, it's pretty customary for the buyer and seller to split it. And the cost of that home warranty, depending on the options they choose and the size of the house, may be around in the low 400s, can be all the way up to 800 or 900, depending on the size of the house and so on and so forth. So a home warranty is just a real good thing. And one of the reasons it's a good thing is because people live in houses differently. And the way that one family lives in a house, hi Cathey, we're glad to have you. The way one family lives in a house is going to be different than the way somebody else, and that's when the problems usually occur. I told them you were going to try to be here,
Yeah,
so we're
I had
glad.
my grandson this morning and then another appointment out of the office, so I just slid in. I remember meeting you, and what's your name?
Dominic.
What is it?
Dominic.
Dominic, I met you in my
Yes.
office,
Yes.
yes. Your friend was Hector,
Yes.
yes, okay.
Yeah.
So I don't want to interrupt, I'll just
No,
listen until.
No, that's fine. We actually went over loans a little bit today, and
Okay.
but they want to hear what you have to say and have to offer. And
Okay, yeah, as you know, we're the in-house lenders here, and it's myself, and then I have a processor, her name's Linda. She's fully licensed, just like me, mainly just does the processing work. And then I see the clients and get them approved and stuff like that. Basically, if you guys have a client, you can have them give me a call anytime on my cell phone's on here, or text me or whatever. But what I kind of start with, I talk to them over the phone, and my general questions are basically, you know, what line of work are you in? How long have you been in it? Then I kind of get an income idea, credit score idea, you know, kind of what, and then kind of what they want to put down, how much. So then I kind of know what category, what type of loan and stuff. And then I always like to ask what they're comfortable with their payment. And then what other bills they have, because that can kind of tell me, I'm sure you guys have heard of debt to income ratio, but that can give me an idea, you know, where their debt to income ratio is. Normally, you know, on a loan, they want at least 2 years and the same line of work and that type of stuff. So, I mean, if you just give me their number, I'll reach out to whoever you need, your buyers or whatever. And then I can get an idea, and if it sounds like it's a go, you know, some people I get and their scores are low, and I've had a bankruptcy, you know, then we kind of put that on hold. But if it sounds like a go, then I email them a list, and on the back of my card basically is what I need. It's real basic stuff. Last 2 years, federal tax returns, pay stubs for 30 days, and then their bank statements for 2 months, wherever their down payment money and stuff coming from. And then I always get copies of their driver's licenses also, and we have to have that in our file. So that just, if they sound like we can do something, then I'll set an appointment and have them bring that stuff. If it's really hard for them to get in here, they can always email it to me. I can always do the application over the phone and stuff. I'm funny about filling out my own applications because I just like to get all the blanks right and stuff. So I like to do that, but over the phone it takes me 10 minutes to fill quick. So we do FHA loans, which are government-backed loans that they just need 3.5% down. We do VA loans, which a veteran, we can get them in for nothing. A lot of times even the seller can help with the closing costs. USDA loans are like in the rural areas, and we can get them in for nothing also. There's just like income limits and stuff. And then the last one that I'm sure you've heard of is conventional. The lowest we can do on those for first-time buyers is 3% down. But on that program, they have to have really good scores and stuff. So we can go 3, 5, 10, 20. Obviously, if they're selling something else and they have 20% down, then they don't have the mortgage insurance. So, but anytime if any one of you or all of you want to sit with me, I mean, we can go over some scenarios just so you kind of see what I'm talking about, you know. But I mean, leave the financing part to me because I can help them. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've been reading the real estate book lately because it's in front of me, and like we don't ask for an FHA what was that, like a processing fee anymore when we sell it, right?
A what? I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you that good. A processing fee?
There's no processing fee that the seller pays on behalf of the buyers on a FHA loan anymore, right?
No, we normally, our lender charges $1,095 for the admin fee, is that what you mean?
But there's,
Oh, the funding fee?
yeah,
Is that what you're talking about?
There's a-
Yeah, FHA does have a
what
funding.
does that?
Yeah, they do have a fund, and so does VA.
Does it?
Yeah, so does VA. They add that into the loan thing.
Which one's a land, which one of the VA loans is a land ownership?
I don't know. You know?
Oh, you mean a land,
We don't do
a
any
land
of that.
contract?
Yeah,
A VA offer is a land
I
contract.
like how that.
Well,
Okay.
caveat may be too, but unless they changed it, VA used to be,
I would totally fail those classes if you guys just pass.
probably most of us
I'm not
would.
gonna look at the answers, I'm gonna figure it out.
If I took my broker's test again, I'd probably get 3%. And I'm not
God.
kidding. A lot of it's irrelevant.
Kathy, what is the debt to income ratio now?
Okay, on FHA, we can get a approval all the way up to 50% on FHA. On,
Does that include the new loan?
yeah.
It has to be within that 50%? Okay.
Yeah, but on conventional, you want to keep it about 45.
Okay.
Because, especially if you have mortgage insurance, you're not going to get an approval over 45. If
Okay.
you have a really clean borrower and say it comes in at 47, 48, right in there, and they're putting 20% down, a lot of times we get an approval.
Okay.
But I like to say in my head 50% on FHA and 45 on conventional.
What's a jumbo in our area now?
What?
A jumbo loan?
A jumbo? Is that what you said?
Uh-huh.
45. It'd be the same. The debt to
No, I
income?
mean the total loan amount.
I think I'm going in debt.
No,
Sorry,
it's
my-
these
my
things
loan amount for a
absorb
jumbo loan.
the,
Jumbo loans are like, since all this came down,
Okay.
I mean, a lot of this is just in the money.
Oh, wow.
But what's the amount in it?
Yeah, it's like
510, 350.
510.
Yeah, it went up to 510. It used to be 487. And what Mitch is asking is if your loan amount goes over 510, 350, it bumps into a jumbo bracket.
Higher interest rate.
Yeah. Oh, jumbo, if it's higher than 510, yeah, it's a higher interest rate. A little bit higher, and they always have to have 20% down. Yeah. So, do you have a jumbo borrower? Somebody that's looking, or you're just wondering? Yeah.
what kind of credit scores for a jumbo?
I think right now you probably have to have at least a 680 right in there. Yeah. To be truthful about the whole jumbo thing, we don't do a lot of them in this area.
Yeah.
Most of our stuff is, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but they moved it up to 510, 350. Yeah, that much money down. So yeah.
That 680, Kathy, is that like, is there like a specific credit bureau or?
What we do, okay, we run all three credit bureaus, which is
Okay.
Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. When we're doing a mortgage, we run all three. We take the middle. We totally just take the middle score. So if you have a 700, a 680, and a 660, we're going to take the 680. We always take the middle score. Yeah, that's what everybody does on real estate stuff. Yeah. So.
I almost hate to ask this because John just left, John Sweeney. So we kind of had a three-way discussion that
Yeah.
everybody got to listen to about, as a lender, Kathy, how do you like to see the offers come in with pest reports and repairs and,
It's a little fun.
okay.
I mean,
So you like to see all of that negotiated off the purchase agreement?
Well, no, I mean, they can be in there, but a lot of times they're gonna want 1 and 2 fixed, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even on clean deals, so, yeah, if they're off of it, that's fine with me, but I don't think I should really say that, right? I don't think, I mean, they need to write them in public. What did Sweeney say? Do you feel different about that?
Well, he feels a little differently than I do, but I'm so old fashioned.
You like it in the contract? Yeah. It just
But I
depends
know
if
that
it's
that's
gonna
not real
cause
common.
problems, yeah, or
Yes.
not, you know?
Marsha, you wanna know my theory on that? Though?
Yes.
If you write it all in and the real estate agent is like the rest of us, and I really do mean. the
Yeah,
rest
because
of
it's
us,
Mitchell, no
Yeah.
they'll
better.
never get it accepted.
Yes.
Sometimes we'll have a chance to make their call. If they pick it up on the repair, like the inspections for their own benefit, then they can ask for those repairs to be done. And if the seller turns them down, that's fine, we'll just find another property. But if that, they will have to negotiate with us one way or another. So at least we have the opportunity to get it accepted initially and then negotiate, like everybody else during the inspection period.
Okay.
So that's the way I feel like, and I know Nikki felt like that, but Lydia didn't feel like that. So
No, Lydia and I kind of agree.
Lydia was more like you?
Yeah.
Yeah, like every, yeah, Lydia was,
Yeah.
I don't know, I haven't went there.
I always told Lydia, if I was better looking, I'd probably get some more, accepted offers too, but unfortunately I got what I got, so,
Can you try to get the seller to do it before they even list it?
Thank
like
you.
Yes.
That way,
Yeah, that's.
fix
a
that
good-
sucker.
Just have the
Yeah.
report done, not necessarily
Right.
the work, but at least get the report done.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah.
Then that would
You're
help
absolutely
you.
right.
Yes.
In a good world, that would happen.
Yeah.
If it's in
We
a
did that.
price range that's typical for FHA, get all the work done before the appraiser.
Yeah, because I didn't fall for everything on everything. Yeah, you're right though, that's a really good point. Because sometimes they list them and I'm like, why is this thing even listed?
I probably wouldn't go as far as doing a home inspection on the property, but definitely.
Or the termite, yes.
The
the
termite, yeah. I'm
Yeah.
not ready to go. But you're right. Yeah.
Good.
Anything else? Or-
Yeah, I have a question. So, my client, was, but he said that, he's a first time buyer. He's wondered if we have a program where, we have a down payment, borrow.
The lowest I have is 3% down, but Mitch may know somewhere that you could send him that does programs, I don't know.
There's Union Bank, at the
Oh,
beginning
yeah.
of the year, Union Bank has some money to help buyers either buy up or help with the down payment. But the money goes away really fast because people are aware of it.
Yeah.
So I'll get you the number for that gentleman. I think it's like Union Bank.
Yeah, reach out to him
Yeah.
and just see.
I think that
yeah.
Irma uses B of A now too, and they've got something like
She's
$17,000.
the one that turned me on.
Do they still have
Okay.
it? Do they still have
It
that?
goes
Because I heard
really
of that in a
fast.
long time, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
good.
I would think especially now with all of this coronavirus
This later in
money.
the year,
It's gone.
Yeah.
You gotta get the time on.
And one of,
So-
yeah, some of
Try to
the
buy
banks
then,
will
right?
do- They'll help.
Yeah.
you. I've never had those programs. You kind of have to be on the list and stuff, to have them, but like she said, Union, B of A, I heard, yeah, that was, I haven't heard of it lately, but they were giving, like we said, 17 or 18,000.
Yeah.
Union
Mhm.
Bank, yeah, and he may know somebody there, if you could check with them.
No, if you haven't met Irma yet,
What that-
Irma is one of our agents
You know what?
and
Before all this
she's
corona stuff,
on the board of the Housing Council. And she's got that information for
Now
you.
the main lender that I use wants a 60.
I'll see if I can get a card if her door is unlocked. I'll get a card for you and you can give her a call and she'll talk to you.
6:30.
Uh-huh.
Transit before you say 50. And double that thing for them. And if you really take that score,
We take the middle, oh,
middle. It's not an average, it's the middle.
nope, it's just the middle, never an average, it's just the middle score, and all banks do that. Yeah. Okay. That's why we always want to read, I think when you buy a car, you only run like one, don't you? But,
I don't
but
know.
a mortgage is down.
That's the guy that works for Union Bank, but like, I know they don't have any money right now. So,
Nobody have money now. They were rolling it up.
Grandma's do, right? And that.
I can't even call, thank you. Yeah. The old.
But you guys can text me or phone me anytime on my cell phone. I'm better on my texting than my email if you want to know me right away. Texting, my phone's always right there, and I hear the beep when I grab it.
That's me too.
Yeah.
Text and call.
But I'm pretty old school. I don't know.
That's good, Kathy.
Yeah.
I think we have 3 really good people
I
here, and we
know,
have
I'm
some
excited
people
for
at
you
home
guys.
too.
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
that's
That's
good.
good.
Great.
Did I give you guys cards already? You want some?
Okay, if there's anybody still
on the
online
back
at
is,
home, we're going to say
what I said
goodbye,
to you,
and
what
we'll
you
see you next Tuesday at 1:30, and we're going to be working on
I know you
listings
just
next
got your
week.
license, right? Or can I have one? And has your